when I talk about it, I go, these are behaviors consistent with the behaviors you would see in a cover-up. Where you have, in late January, Fauci and Collins in an email with their top scientists, and their top scientists are going, we think it's more likely than not that it was engineered in a lab, and that's where it's from. And then days later, they are out there with both an open letter in Lancet calling the people saying that it might have been a lab leak conspiracy theorists. And then a few weeks after that, being in Nature Medicine with the Proximal Origins paper, just basically giving 0% probability of it as a lab leak. Those are disinformation campaigns by their own account, and then they are then demanding censorship on the basis of their disinformation.
Welcome to Conversations with me, Peter Boghossian. Today I am beyond delighted to welcome my friend Michael Shellenberger to the podcast. Michael is an author, investigative journalist, and the founder and president of Environmental Progress, a nonprofit research organization. He co-founded California Peace Coalition, an alliance of parents and children killed by fentanyl and parents of homeless addicts. Michael is the author of The Death of Environmentalism, Apocalypse Never, and most recently, one of my favorite books of all times, San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin Cities. He also co-authored an eco-modernist manifesto. We talked about aliens, censorship, friendship, anxiety, moving in the public space. It was a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Michael Shellenberger, great to have you here.
Good to be with you, Peter.
So Reid and I go all around the world and we talk to people about controversial things. We talk to people about trans issues. We talk to people about race, gender, etc. However, there is one issue. There is one issue that no matter where we go in the world, it is absolutely, positively, and unequivocally our most discussed and requested topic. Would you have any idea what that what that issue would be?
You know, it's like a hot stove. Like I touch it, and then you're just like. But the irony about this issue, whose name shall not be mentioned, but the irony of it is that it's not controversial in Congress. It's actually weirdly bipartisan. This is what people don't know. I mean, so the Senate Intelligence Committee just yesterday or 2 days ago introduced legislation that would require that the Defense Department provide all information it has about retrieved UFO craft.
Right.
And we expect that will be mirrored. It was intelligence, and it will be mirrored in the military because they're under two separate security classifications. But the crazy thing is, here you have Marco Rubio and Kristen Gillibrand.
That's crazy, right?
Working super well together. The legislation that required disclosure by the Intel, and it will also likely be done for DoD, on UAPs passed unanimously in the committee. So it's funny because on the one hand, it's the craziest issue I work on.
Truly.
And
no
question about it.
Question.
In fact, it actually, I think, raises a bunch of epistemological questions, not to use a piece of jargon, but questions around the status of knowledge and how do we know what we know, and how much confidence can we have in certain things. And I find myself talking in probabilities rather than in some certainties. I mean, that's in all of our work, but yeah, no, I mean, I love talking about it. So yeah, let's get into it. What do you want to talk about?
Okay, so here's what I want to talk to you about. I don't want to linger on this for too long, but it's
people love it. I know, for sure.
It's genuinely, it would be, if true, it's as big as a revolution as of the invention of fire. I mean, it would be the single biggest. So one of the things you said, I loved your interview with Shermer, by the way. I thought it was fantastic. One of the things that Shermer said, asked you, that not only gave him pause, but also gave me pause, was when he said, have you ever talked to anybody who alleged to have seen the craft? Now that's very different than I knew this guy who worked in this 50 floors down, right?
Right.
And you said yes.
Yes.
And was it like glowing or something, or was it?
Well, no, I described it in the article I wrote. The person described multiple craft. The one that I quoted verbatim because it was so bizarre was the person called it a chopped up helicopter.
How do they know it's a alien craft? I mean, that's quite a Bayesian. That's quite a leap.
Well, so first of all, the first thing to understand about all the people that I interviewed is that they are all in positions to know. They all have high levels of security clearance. I'm trying to be very careful to never reveal their gender or which agency or even what part of the federal government they're in. But the person that did describe the craft, I quoted them describing it specifically as a sort of as kind of a modified helicopter or deep sea submarine with a kind of bubble, but we hear a lot of different descriptions, but this person gave very specific descriptions. And I should say, of course, the person could have been lying to me, but this is also, if this person was lying, this is an incredible
fabrication
lie to choose. Yeah. And everybody was scared to talk. Nobody wanted me to use their name. Part of what happened, I think it's important to know, is that, you may know that Matt Taibbi and I were grilled in front of Congress, and they were like, reveal your sources, and who are you? And that was a terrible experience on the one hand, and hilarious as well. But I think part of the consequence was that we've had a number of people that have been willing to talk to us now. FBI whistleblowers.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So FBI whistleblowers, we just did a big piece on COVID. I've been advertising us as saying, look, I'll go to prison for my sources. My kids are grown up, so, why not? But we take that very seriously. I think they know that. So these are people with whom we've built some trust, and they told us these things. So my sense is that nobody was lying to me.
They could have been mistaken, but not lying.
Sure.
So I don't know.
Yeah, there's other possibilities. Is it a form of psychosis? If it's a form of psychosis, I've never seen psychosis like this. In other words, I interview psychotic people on the street, either from meth or schizophrenia. Yeah, people have seen me do it. I have actually, one of the most famous videos is a guy describing aliens. Those psychotic descriptions of aliens and UFOs are nothing like this. They're like word salad, sort of, and it's very dreamlike. These are very specific descriptions of physical objects, not of daydreams or fantasies. So I felt comfortable publishing the article, but also saying, here's what you can rely on me to be reporting accurately. It can reply accurately. This is what people told me.
All right, so I have a question for you. My understanding is that your position is you're not saying there are or aren't alien craft. You're saying that you want a thorough, comprehensive investigation that's open to the public and transparent.
Yes, that's right. I feel this, in some ways, this issue fits more into my growing concern around secrecy, abuses of power, censorship, surveillance by governments around the world. It's happening in a lot of different places. The phenomenon is super interesting on its own, but I also feel like there's things that people know that in a democracy we should all be allowed to know. And yes, there's ontological shock potentially with it. If it's a form of psychosis or a kind of hysteria or something, some new psychogenic phenomenon, then we should understand that too, because we're talking about people in positions of power having this. And so whatever the phenomenon is, it should come into the light and not be kept in the dark.
100%. And again, just to be crystal clear, there is absolute bipartisan support on this. This is not a Democrat issue. This is not, like, everybody wants to.
Which is somewhat new, I should say, because I do think UFOs were more something that liberals were interested in, I would think, in decades past. I think that the people that helped to create this latest wave, which really starts 2017 with the New York Times article by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, I think that they did a very good job of making it bipartisan. They deserve a lot of credit. There were Democrats more than others. It was Representative Harry Reid and John Podesta, who are very famous Democrats. But they did, to their credit, and I have huge disagreements with John Podesta at this point on a bunch of issues, but I think they did a really good job of making it bipartisan. I think that we've seen conservative media show a lot of interest in this. So the Daily Wire covers it.
It's fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating. You know, I
Yeah.
want to say, like, one of the things that I love about your work, both everything subsequent to Apocalypse Never in San Francisco, that book more or less completely changed the way I look at the homelessness, drug addiction, housing. It totally changed it.
Yeah.
So well researched, so thoughtful, is that you've done the homework, and you know, we're friends, and when we speak, I'm just amazed at the books and information that you have on your, like, you have. I mean, I read a lot, but you, my God, you really read a lot. So I've always liked the knowledge and the rigor combined, and I think it grounds the integrity. You know, so when I hear something like this, and I thought your position on this issue and others was very, very reasonable. You're not claiming they're a craft, you're not claiming they're not craft, you're claiming you just want an investigation. I think that's the most reasonable.
Well, and I think we should get to this issue of what you want, because when I was with Joe Rogan, he said, and it was wonderful because he was so honest about his own desires. He said, I want it to be true.
Of course, absolutely, 100%.
I'm not sure I do. I'll be honest with you.
Why?
Not totally sure I do.
Why?
Well, so first of all, just consider the fact that if it is true, then if the phenomenon appears to be like, if it's non-human entities, they're more powerful than we are.
For sure, no question.
Because otherwise,
they couldn't have gotten here.
We barely go to the moon.
Yeah.
So that means and not only that, but if you look at the incidents, particularly the ones around the military, the Navy pilots, what they will say
the
is
tic-tac
that
and all those
they're demonstrating. I forget. There's a technical military term for it. Somebody in the comments will say what it is, but they're demonstrating superiority. They're demonstrating that they control that airspace. And that has been one of the themes of various encounters, is that the phenomenon, whatever it may be, is demonstrating superiority to us. And there's definitely a whole wing of people that are like, these are space brothers warning us not to have nuclear weapons. There's other people that are like, there's a malevolent side. Recall that this latest wave, just the last month, has been around a whistleblower named David Grush.
That's right.
Who gave a 45-minute interview to News Nation that is really worth watching, because the story he's presenting is of non-human intelligence, and the story he's telling is that there's malevolent actors and benevolent actors, and that there's a multiplicity. So we're not talking about a single being, and that was also what my sources said too. And further, there's one story that sort of says there are space brothers here to warn us against nuclear and environmental catastrophe. There's another sort of story that says they just want a spaceport out of Area 51, and that's it. It's just they want some elements and
wild
some spaceport, and it's just and that's it. Whatever is going on, let's just
100%.
Let's just figure out what it is, and
100%.
it's just having all that information hoarded, because information is power, and so we're seeing, according to Grush and according to my sources, an abuse of power by some elements within the U.S. military and intelligence community, and potentially in other countries too. Though my sources did not. Grush said that, but my sources didn't know about anything in Russia or China.
All right, let me throw something out. So when I read criticisms of the Twitter files, not necessarily of you, but of the idea that why shouldn't the government be able to censor material? I mean, you've been asked that before.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's see if we can make the best case for
I was going to say, let's see if we can steelman it.
So, I mean, one thing is you would start with the forms of censorship that we do allow and see if we want to expand it. So we allow censorship of certain kinds of speech that would enable fraud.
Right.
You know, I can't tell you that I own the Brooklyn Bridge and then sell it to you.
Right.
We also don't, or rather there's punishment for that. And then we also don't allow immediate incitement to violence.
Right.
I can't say, everybody, come on, let's kill Peter, and then kill Peter. There's some recognition of that famous Wittgenstein sense of a language game. Language can, in that very specific instance. But in the United States, one of the first things you learn when you read up on it, and I only recently have, so I'm not suggesting I'm a scholar or an expert or any of that, but it's very clear, and now that I've been working on other countries too, it's very clear that we have the strictest freedom of speech in the United States.
Yeah, and I can't take Apocalypse Never, rip off the front cover, put Apocalypse No, Peter Boghossian.
Right. Exactly. So, but like the fact that you can actually come up with the restrictions in a few minutes on one hand is really different from where you would be in Soviet Russia or under Nazi Germany, where many regulations, and so much so that people can't even keep track of them. So, and where we're headed, and the concern I have is that we start to see that happening around the world. I just got into a thing today on Twitter where we've been following the case in Ireland, which is really creepy and disturbing.
That. That was great.
So
tell people about that real quick.
Okay, well, so this is it's really around hate speech, and the idea is, and so you can see it almost building off of the immediate incitement to violence. So instead of it being immediate, now we're saying we're taking that immediacy out, and we're suggesting might in some way result in real world harm.
Bill 2022.
The bill literally would allow the police to go into your home without a warrant, search your phone and computers. If they discover material that, right now, this is one of the other characteristics and other patterns, hateful material undefined.
Yeah.
So we're not really clear what that includes.
The bill is hateful material, so let's do it.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what I said. Yeah, for sure. I think your op-ed, Justice Minister, of Ireland, I think your op-ed is hateful material and it's in your home, so I should be able to go into it. Oh, well, no, we don't mean that. Well, then you're in a sort of, you and I are working on this project, which we may get to, but we're talking about sort of the psychopathology here.
Right.
One of the characteristics of this psychopathology is the feeling that you have around people that we might call histrionic or cluster B, where you're always walking on eggshells.
Right.
Well, that's kind of the environment that gets created. Do I have, it's sort of self-censoring and paranoid. Oh my gosh, I have this material in my house? I'm really scared. What if someone comes in? Well, that's what they want.
Yeah, that mirrors the university, my experience in the university.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I used the wrong pronoun. Right. Oh, I got your race wrong.
Everybody is walking on eggshells and nobody knows what anybody else actually believes.
And then one of the mechanisms to defend against that is to become a perpetrator. And so in order to make sure that everybody knows that I'm not racist, I'm going to go out and persecute and bully people. And you see this classic bullying pattern, right? The people around the bully are actually quite scared. They don't want to be victims of the bully, so they're going to actually help the bully. So that's I think that's, anyway, so that's the negative case for it. I guess if you're trying to make a positive case for it, you would say there's too much hate in society, we should reduce it. Look,
but go ahead.
First of all, one of the things, and I will say, because I think it's easy to get a little, I go back and forth. There's certainly days where I'm like, we're doomed. We're just headed towards totalitarianism, and that's just what's happening. It's the end of civilization. This is just classic, civilization's dying. There's other days where I'm like, that's absurd. People, like your average person, would rather have more free speech than less. And the Irish, they have a public comment period in Ireland.
Yeah.
A very good Irish journalist, there's very few independent good Irish journalists, Ben Scallon, went and counted all 3,500 public comments and categorized them as mostly positive or negative on the bill. 75% were negative on the bill. 75% of voters don't want this bill.
Don't want infringements on free speech.
They don't want the infringements. And then you get to the issue of tolerance and you're like, I'm sorry, find me another period in human history where we've been more accepting of racial, sexual, and religious minorities. Would that be, the Middle Ages when Christians and Protestants were murdering each other? Would that be the 1950s when only 4% of Americans accepted marriage between black and white Americans?
Yeah, and they were actually institutionalized with miscegenation laws.
Yeah. So find me another period where, so one of the things that we have been able to do, just I think through our work in Twitter, and sort of also we've now emailed a lot of groups, which I think is very important, asking for interviews.
Yeah.
Only 1 out of 50, over more than 50, has agreed. but saying, where's the evidence that there's been an increase in hate speech in any society? And so they've actually shifted their discourse recently. They've started saying there's too much hate speech rather than there's been an increase. So I do think there's definitely something bad going on. There's an organic element to it, which is that organic cancel culture that we've been talking about for half a decade.
Yeah.
And then there's an inorganic part of it, which is that you see the elites, including ones tied to military and intelligence and security services, that are using the kind of organic hate speech sort of language to justify greater control over social media for a range of policy issues, including ones on things like climate change and Ukraine that don't have anything to do with the typical hate speech categories.
Okay, let me ask you two questions. One is a curveball. I actually have three questions. Have seen in the last year this idea of elites come up all the time. And what do people mean when they say elites?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, elites is it's an old idea, which is that really there's conflicts between elites and...
Are they like, the semantic range of that term has expanded significantly, so I'm not even sure what people mean by that.
Yeah, that's fair. So, I mean, for me, I'm referring to the people who control the universities, the people who own and mostly work at most newspapers.
Okay,
The
so you're not
members
talking
of the European
okay.
Parliament.
All right, I got you.
In other words, because people kind of go, where is this demand for censorship coming from? I'll tell you where it's not coming from.
Yeah.
It's not coming from factory workers. It's not coming from the people bagging your groceries. It's not coming from Uber drivers. It's coming from people with college degrees.
That's a great way to think about it.
And one category, this is a bit of jargon, although I think it is descriptively helpful, is just professional managerial class, or PMC.
Okay.
And the concept, I think, was really well developed in a sort of non-Marxist way by people like Christopher Lasch, who wrote about narcissism in the 70s. He also wrote about the revolt of the elites, a kind of backlash of the elites. And so I'm using it also in the sense of Martin Gurry, revolt of the public. His argument, of course, is that the internet and social media in particular give voice to the people, to the masses, and that then there's a counter-revolution from the elites, which are like, ugh, and they blame Brexit and Trump and the two big revolutions of 2016 on the internet and social media. I hasten to add, most political scientists do not think that you can attribute either Brexit or Trump's victory to social media. Just to give you a sense of it, most Trump voters got their news, like 70% got their news from Fox, only 7% from Facebook. But that was, I think, also, it was a genuine belief. It was how Hillary Clinton sort of explained her failure. But I think it was also then a useful justification to be able to demand censorship.
Okay, let me throw a couple curveball questions. One of the things I have heard from many Iranian leaders is that they want depictions of the Muslim prophet censored by the government. And the claim is, the analog is, you censor the N-word, why don't you just add this one more category? Have you heard this argument?
Who censors the N-word?
Well, that was what I was going to say. So it's legal to use the N-word. It's ill-advised for a number of reasons, but it's legal. And so they want, like, desecration of the Quran banned. So this idea that some people have, I don't even want to know, it's not, okay, so here's the thing. I think the Western way to look at this is that they have sensibilities and they don't want to offend people, but the other way to look at it is that, and we don't have to go down this rabbit hole, but just kind of thinking out loud when you were talking, that it is against their religious beliefs. And so they want that institutionalized. And so I find that to be, I don't want to run down a rabbit hole.
Well, no, I mean, I think it does, I think there is one issue. There's a couple of things. First, on the one hand, that your speech is offensive to my religious views.
Right.
We worked that out several hundred years ago, which was that might be the case, but that is not justification for censorship, and that we're going to allow people to the right to be offensive. And Kathleen Stock, in her recent Oxford talk, made the case for the right to be offensive. The second issue, though, has to do with the internet platforms, which is, you may know that Elon Musk, one of the first things he did is he censored Kanye for tweeting out this kind of dumb, combination of the Star of David and a swastika.
Right.
The internet platforms definitely censor. It's called content moderation. Elon came in and he said two things which are inconsistent. He said, I'm a free speech absolutist, and I'm going to follow the laws of countries.
Right.
Well, no country is a free speech absolutist, so it's actually the latter. But no government asked Elon, as far as I know, to take down Kanye's tweet or deplatform him, and he did it anyway. And the advertisers have been imploring Elon to censor even more. And part of that drama around the censorship of What is a Woman, that the documentary film by the Daily Wire that aired about transgenderism on Twitter, his own staff had censored it. He then gets back from his trip abroad and discovers what was going on, and then he famously fires his director, his top censor. But I think the point for me, where I came down to it, and I testified in front of Congress on this, because we testified on the Twitter files, but then I testified about big tech censorship. The First Amendment says you cannot require somebody to say anything either. So the First Amendment, it's not just Abigail Schreier, who a mutual friend of ours is very good on this, that you can't make somebody use pronouns legally. It's not, the First Amendment protects...
Not even in Canada.
Right, apparently, yeah. So the First Amendment protects our right to not be told we have to do something. That's why the kids don't have to say the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. That was one of the first, I was a young radical kid, and so I did not say the Pledge of Allegiance because I knew my First Amendment rights. So similarly, no one can make Elon Musk keep Kanye's tweet up. Elon has the right, as the owner of Twitter, to take it down. So the best we can do, what we can do is say, if you would like your Section 230 permission to operate as a platform, which gives you broad liability protection, then all we're saying is we need you to be transparent about the censorship decisions that you're making. So if you're going to take down Kanye's tweet, then you have to be transparent about it, which he was. I would go further and say you should also give the right to reply. Kanye should have a reason to explain why he thinks combining the Star of David and the swastika is really about bringing greater peace. I have a hard time repeating the Kanye argument because I don't agree with it, but he would have argued combining the swastika and the Star of David was somehow a proper thing to do. But that's my view, is that the solution to hate speech and negative speech and speech we don't like is more speech. If someone's ridiculing Muhammad or disparaging Muhammad, then go out and make the case of why Islam is a beautiful religion and Muhammad is our prophet, and you have the right to do that. You have a right to proselytize.
All right, Reid, are we going to look at some things, some videos, or this quotation, or what? Okay, so you can look at that if you want.
Me? Okay.
So this is from the Institute for Strategic...
My favorite.
Yes.
My favorite people.
Yes.
They are actively demeaning me, Jordan Peterson and Bjorn Lomborg, at this moment. They're lying. I'm really clear. They're lying about my position on climate change. So just so my biases are apparent. While debate about what is appropriate entertainment for children and at what ages is legitimate and deserves fair hearing, these tactics serve to undermine discussion with chilling consequences for free expression, creating a fertile ground for potential uptick in violence. Institute for Strategic Violence, wow, that was quite the Freudian slip. Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Well, all right.
What do you say about that?
Well, okay, so this is a report by a censorship advocacy organization called the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, ISD, which has been funded in the past by the US Department of Defense and by the British government.
Terrifying.
This is an organization that is lying about my own views about climate change. It's also attacking Jordan Peterson and Bjorn Lomborg and others. So my read of that tweet is that they're saying that the criticisms and the demand that drag shows, is that right? Drag shows? Is that what we said?
I think it's Drag Queen Story Hour is the
right.
full,
Yeah, so the protests of Drag Queen Story Hour are themselves an inhibition on freedom of speech. So I think that the first thing you notice on this particular issue is that we're talking about children, and I think that this is also I think there's people have been quite dishonest about the distinction here. For the most part, everything that you and I have been talking about up until now has been about censorship for adults.
Correct.
All of us, particularly those of us who are parents, know that we actually do want to censor a significant amount of content for kids. And in fact, I wish that more content had been censored in some cases. For me, there were certain things that were quite, I think, inappropriate that I saw as a kid. I think there's a lot of things that are inappropriate for kids to see. I support pretty significant restrictions on smartphone usage for kids. For me, I think Jonathan Haidt has made a good case for much greater restrictions on social media.
I was going to say, it's not
kids.
His research showed, to my understanding, it's not it's what you do on the phone, and social media is one of the big problems of that.
Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of it for the girls, it's seen.
And nobody wants to say there's a difference between boys and girls, but the data, it's just borne out by the data.
For sure. Yeah, boys playing games has a whole bunch of pro-social benefits. Girls watching other people be models, live these ridiculous lives that they'll never obtain is depressing and loneliness making.
Yeah.
And also then it excludes them from others. And then messaging, you can actually intensify the bullying. So, so for me, I think that putting restrictions on content that children are exposed to is totally legitimate, totally consistent with First Amendment free speech.
Agreed. All right, check out this clip, and we know both of these gentlemen.
Oh, sure.
I said at the beginning of COVID that I believed, well, I have a general principle, which is that some stories, by their very nature, diagnose the system. That watching the system process a given story reveals the nature of the system as much as it reveals anything about the story in question. And I said at the beginning of COVID that it was a story that was going to diagnose our system. It was going to let us understand the deep corruption of that system, how far it reached. And in fact, I believe I was right about this. It lets us see the corruption of our academic institutions, of our journalistic institutions, of our government. It let us see how far into our personal discussions the government was capable of reaching, how thoroughly it could breach our rights. And, I would say the report card, we got an F. And the only reason we got an F is because there's no lower grade, right? COVID revealed all of these defects. And I know that in part because I was on the wrong end of that censorious instinct for almost the entire time. Heather and I began discussing COVID as biologists on Dark Horse, and it resulted in us quickly becoming demonetized by YouTube, which they've never reversed, even though they were wrong on the substance of what they complained about. And we feel their thumb, or the thumb of whatever it is that guides YouTube, their thumb is still on the scale, not only at YouTube, but we feel it at Twitter. And I don't think that's Musk's doing. I think there's something deeply embedded in his machine that still would like to keep us from reaching an audience, even though we've been vindicated across the board with respect to what we understood. But in any case,
deep corporate is the counterpart to the deep state. I think it exists. It's part of this managerial bureaucracy that spans the public sector, the private sector, the associate deans of God knows what at universities. It's a separate kind of DNA and a different kind of gene pool.
It is the wholesale capture of every structure on which we depend. There seems to be not a single institution that has been able to resist this. The only thing that resists it are small numbers of individuals who are not beholden to anyone.
Yeah, it is a universal solvent. It destroys everything it touches once it gets in.
What's the it in that sense?
I was trying to avoid the word. That's why I said it. A critical social justice, wokeism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, can we pause for a minute on the word wokeism? Are you backing away from it? the word?
No, but I knew that if some people, if I said that, the people would hear that and then that did just click off or what have you.
Yeah.
So, then I thought about saying, okay, critical social justice.
Right. Or what about, do you ever use political correctness?
But that's
The
too limiting for me because
290s
it's not the dated. It's it just mean I mean the term much more broadly, and so like I hear that I think he's first of all I know nothing about biology, like zero. I know nothing about COVID. I'm like, and I've avoided that just because I don't think anybody should listen to me because I'm completely unqualified to talk about that. So, but he's talking about something different. Matt Ridley and others, the unbelievable grief that for saying that the lab leak.
I did my first story on it, so I'm actually quite shocked by, and I think the lab leak proponents are all suffering from, PTSD is probably too strong a word, but maybe there's you can see it in Bret too. I think there was real, I hate to say trauma.
Yeah.
But it was some pain with it and the harshness of the response. But okay, well, what do you want to get into?
Well, there's so many places we can go with this. The grief that he got with Heather from going on Bill Maher and talking about the lab leak hypothesis. You're a conspiracy theorist. That's it. The other thing is they're calling everybody. You don't agree with James Lindsay's a conspiracy. Everybody's a conspiracy. They don't. If you don't agree with them, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Right.
As opposed to like okay.
Yeah, the people that are in the conspiracy love to call their critics conspiracy theorists.
I know.
Yeah, it's a very powerful word. So is conspiracy theorist and disinformation are words that instantly control. They instantly take over your brain.
Yeah.
It's like the word homeless. It's very hard to escape. That's why I've been emphasizing the censorship, because censorship also, I think just at a pure philosophy of language level, the choice of what are we talking about? Are we talking about censorship? Are we talking about disinformation? Are we talking about the street addiction crisis? Or are we talking about homelessness? These words are very powerful. Yeah. So that's the one thing to note with it. But I think one of the things I wanted to say about the COVID that I think we haven't talked enough about, which is that there is still a very strong sense among everybody, elites and people and ordinary folks, that in a crisis, we're justified at suspending freedom of speech.
Yes.
That's very pervasive and unquestioned. And so now I think in the particular case of COVID, there was a really strong argument to strengthen free speech protections, and for very specific reasons. For example, we all know now that COVID was not a single virus, that it was evolving and you had multiple variants, and the efficacy of the vaccine thus changed. We know that we were promised a vaccine that would stop the virus.
Correct.
There's actually, I just did Russell Brand in Britain, and he showed this amazing clip of Rachel Maddow being like, once you take the vaccine, it will stop the virus, you will not get sick, and you will not transmit it. Neither of those things were true. Under their own criteria, you could call it disinformation. But so the moment that it became clear that the vaccine wouldn't do that, you would want to know that. And similarly, you would want to have a public conversation about that.
Yeah.
And not only that, but the moment that you knew that there were vaccine side effects and or that kids may not need the vaccine, you would want to talk about that. You ask every parent, would you like to know if other parents who gave the vaccine to their children had side effects in their children? Every parent wants to know that. So I think that it is important to be specific and have specific examples. I do think COVID's a great case for making the case for freedom of speech. In a pandemic, you want freedom of speech. You want to have a robust discussion.
You want more and not less.
You want
openness.
Or just you want to protect your freedom of speech, and I think beware those in whom the will to censor is strong. They are dangerous people. We see it. This guy Peter Hotez, who was famously wouldn't debate. You kind of go. He was out there advocating censorship all throughout the pandemic in really creepy, messed up ways. So, dogmatic people that are demanding censorship are also spreading disinformation and are trying to silence their opponents. So it's such an old thing, right? Like, you could go back to many points in time where there's been these conversations in the past, and we always end up coming to the same lesson, which is that freedom of speech is so important, not as an abstract thing, but actually to saving lives and keeping ourselves healthy. And I think that this idea that somehow freedom of speech somehow undermines safety is
Crazy.
the worst. It's wrong.
I just want to bring a very quick attention for the viewers to Andrew Doyle's book, Free Speech. It's very accessible. It's
I can't wait to read it.
Super easy to read. Highest recommendation. So
Yeah, great. The Brits are really killing it right now. I just read Brendan O'Neill's book.
Oh yeah, I met him. Reid and I had drinks with him with Andrew. What a great guy.
So it's my favorite book I've read
on
since
my list.
Yeah, it's my favorite book
Since my book.
Since your book. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for finishing my sentence. I was gonna say Helen Joyce. Her book on
we interviewed
trans
her.
is brilliant.
God, she blew my mind in that interview.
Her book is outstanding. Even if you're like
yeah.
even if it's not an issue that you care a lot about, that book is just so well done as a nonfiction book. His book is a set of essays.
He's the best guy to hang out with, man. We were
he's amazing.
Really he's just, I don't know if you had a chance to,
As an heir to George Orwell.
Yeah, he is great to hang out with.
Anyway. The opening essay is just called "Her Penis."
Yes,
and
that's right. I heard Andrew interview him on Spike's
It's an incredible
podcast.
It's an incredible piece, as a stylist, but also as a debater making an argument.
Okay, I'm going to order that on Amazon, but I have no place. We've been traveling for months and months. I have no place from home, and I don't like to read on a Kindle. I like to actually book. You know. I like audiobooks. Just by the way, I like audiobooks, but only if the author reads them.
Same.
I don't. It just
Same.
it doesn't.
Yeah,
it
sure.
seems inauthentic if somebody reads them. Okay, Reid, do we have another one we're gonna show, Michael?
I don't know your position either during the so-called pandemic or your position now on what happened during the pandemic, but as somebody who had his life turned completely upside down over these issues, I am very interested in what you thought and what you think now, and how it would affect your power in governance if you did make it to the presidency.
Yeah. So I think that the virus originated in a lab in Wuhan, China. It was engineered, and it was engineered by a form of research, gain-of-function research, that was banned here in the United States, but was nonetheless funded in part using U.S. taxpayer dollars because of the rogue behavior of U.S. government actors in the deep state who disagreed with that policy. And taxpayer dollars and the law be damned, funded it anyway, under the excuse of preventing a global pandemic that gave us a global pandemic instead. Then they funded and uses taxpayer dollars again to fund the creation of vaccines to prevent the spread of that pandemic in the name of helping the health of a general population that ended up covering up many of the health risks associated with that vaccine. It happened by no coincidence to be some of the very same actors that literally funded the creation of the pandemic that then went on to fund the creation of the vaccines, again, dressed up in the garb of helping humanity, did not help humanity in the way that they professed to. And then we see the rise of a policy response that, in the name of helping humanity, made all kinds of mistakes that leave us worse off even along the very health axes: depression, anxiety, education of our children, obesity, diabetes, cancer treatment, and so on, that are net worse on health axes alone, let alone economic axes, just health axes alone, than they otherwise would have been had we not adopted those policies. Yet, the very companies that were able to censor any debate about those policies were the principal beneficiaries financially of those policies. That includes most of the Silicon Valley establishment. So I could probably go on for hours, but in summary, that is roughly what I think is some of the most useful parts that we could actually learn lessons from.
Well, it's worse than that even too, because he left out the part that. So, and by the way, I'm 90% on lab leak, so I just 100% is doesn't leave any room. So, but I'll say 90%, and so if that is the case, if the 90% case lab leak is true, it's also that the people that created the pandemic then covered up where it came from and demanded the censorship of the people who wanted to get the truth out and spread disinformation. So you sort of see it's all
that is
in
the
that.
next level of I don't even know. I was going to say dastardly. That doesn't even.
I mean, what's
begin
so
to
interesting,
describe
what
it.
I keep
Sinister.
saying is when I talk about it, I go, these are behaviors consistent with the behaviors you would see in a cover-up.
Yeah.
Where you have in late January, Fauci and Collins in an email with their top scientists, and their top scientists are going, we think it's more likely than not that it was engineered in a lab, and that's where it's from. And then days later, they are out there with both an open letter in Lancet calling the people saying that it might have been a lab leak conspiracy theorists. And then a few weeks after that, being in Nature Medicine with the proximal origins paper, just basically giving 0% probability of it as a lab leak. Those are disinformation campaigns by their own account, and then they are then demanding censorship on the basis of their disinformation.
That is so next level crazy. I mean, it just
is.
such an entangled, so systemically. Everybody loves to use the word. It's like
right. Structural.
Yeah, dishonesty or something.
Yeah. And or you could say structural racism if you needed to, because of course here they are calling. We have this history of lab leaks around the world that is multiple countries, and they said no, it's more likely that it came from Chinese eating bats or pangolins, and yet that's somehow not racist. But idea that those came from a lab leak was racist.
Right.
I mean, that's the stuff that Orwell would talk about too, which was that it doesn't matter how crazy our story is.
Right.
Black is white, white is black, up is down, falsity is truth. It's pathological. It's not, it's dishonest. It's so dishonest that the only way you can go along with it is to be a part of the sickness.
So let me ask you a question. What keeps you going? Like, you got a crazy amount of grief from people. I mean, I see what they do to you online. I can't even imagine your email, and I'll tell you off camera what someone recently did to me. But what motivates you and keeps you going?
The best part of losing all your friends is making new ones.
Yeah.
Making friends with you.
Yeah.
I just had this beautiful trip to London and made
Winston.
New friends.
I stayed with Winston for a month. You stayed in my bedroom, right?
I'm jealous. Wow, full month.
Didn't you stay in my bedroom down there?
Sure.
In our bedroom? My bedroom.
Oh, I get to share it now.
Yeah.
Winston Marshall, Brendan O'Neill, Constantine Kizin, Francis Foster.
Great guy.
Andrew Doyle, who
Great guy.
I've only met over TV, but Nina Power, Helen Joyce,
Nina,
Maya
I interviewed every one of those people.
Yeah. There's something about
Nina's great too. Yeah.
Talking about, I think London, it's one of, it's the financial, but also the political capital.
Yeah.
It's that little area around Westminster, that all these magazines are. It's amazing.
Let's talk about, I think this is really important. I'd like to talk about our relationships with those people.
Yeah.
Because I knew throughout this interview, like every single person you named, like Abigail, no matter who it was, I'm like, that's a friend of mine. That's a friend of mine. That's a friend of mine. There are. So I'll overshare if that's okay.
No, I love it. So
I've lost a lot of friends. I've lost a lot of good friends. I've lost friends who have been in my home. I've lost friends who have told me explicitly, emphatically, that I am again on the quote wrong side of history. Have you gotten that yet? I get that constantly. That's the number one thing I get. You're on the wrong side. So I've lost. I'll tell you off camera who they are. But so I've lost friends.
Yeah.
And I wonder to myself if they were ever my friends to begin with, to a certain extent. And like why does it have to be that you have to have ideological congruity with someone? But the other thing that I've noticed that the people, everybody you mentioned there, it's not just that they share my beliefs about something. I mean, one of the reasons that we became friends, at least is my perception at the Chris Rufo conference a while ago, is because you said, I really want to learn, after your presentation, I really want to learn, and if I've said something that's in error, I want to know. And I was like, wow, like I completely respected that. And so I'm wondering if the people you named, it's not just that they share an ideology or a view, it's that they have an attitudinal disposition toward the truth and they have a personal integrity.
Yes.
And I think that is the new basis for, or that ought to be a basis for friendships with people. You know, Aristotle calls them virtue friendships, friendships of virtue.
Well, I love that because I remember when you and I were becoming friends,
Yeah.
and you were like, well, if we're going to become friends, that's a serious thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like, you know, it's like the expression, you know, people who are quick to apologize, the apology doesn't mean much.
Right,
you know, and it's similar, like people that are quick to make friends, the friendships don't mean much. Friendships are grounded in something. I mean, yeah, I definitely agree. I think that there's, I want to try to say this in a way that doesn't disparage people, I'll say in a positive way.
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot of strength and courage to be involved in political life and political discourse right now, and that just not everybody has that. And it's I lost friends. I also lost donors, and the donors, it was just honestly, I was glad to get rid of them because they would only have one thing that they were asking us to do, which was to stop upsetting other progressives, and it was like. The problem became us telling the truth, not the fact that other people were not, I'm not going to say they were borderline personality or histrionic, but exhibiting those behaviors where you had to walk on eggshells. Oh gosh, did I say it right? You know what? You know, friends you can be honest with, and you can tell your truth, and it's not like
Yeah, and when I was having personal difficulties, you offered to come down to my house and help me out, and I appreciate that. And I have noticed,
and that's easy. The hard stuff, of course, is the would you have my back in a scrap?
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
you know, and also, or would you distance yourself from me
Yeah.
in a scrap? You know, that's the most painful experience in a fight is having friends not be there for you or distance themselves from you. And I think it's important that, for me anyway, you know, you can sit there and be like, oh no, it's fine and whatever, and you know, but it's kind of like it's not actually. And you know, we were talking about Winston Marshall. His own story is very
Fascinating,
public because
yeah.
he's already talked a lot about it. But yeah, totally sold out by his so-called friends. I mean, I won't listen to Mumford and Sons.
Yeah, I won't
That's
either.
how, I mean, like literally, I
Yeah.
won't listen to
Yeah.
it because the music, it just isn't the
and
same when you know what these guys that are singing, how they behaved in literally
Horrific.
in their own, in a test of their character, they failed. The music, I just can't listen to.
He lost his friends. He lost everything.
Yeah, everything.
So
Yeah.
give me a reality check.
Yeah.
It just seems to me the people we've named, they're just unbelievably good people.
Yes.
Winston is just like, these people are unbelievably good people. The other crazy thing about Winston is I've only known him for a few months. I met him in Austin at an event. We became immediately close.
Yeah.
He's a Christian. I'm not a Christian. And I heard you're a Christian.
Yes.
And I'm not a Christian, and we're friends.
Doesn't seem to get in the way of anything.
No, it
so
doesn't
far.
say, no, I mean, but why, right? But it doesn't,
Yeah.
I do think that it's crazy to get caught in that notion, that I will say that I was caught in that notion a while ago, that, you know, somebody's metaphysics is totally, well, I wouldn't say totally irrelevant, but it's almost totally irrelevant. Whereas someone's ethics and someone's integrity and someone's behavior and the way someone treats you, those are the things that are relevant. And those are the bases for which we should have base our friendship.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's. I think you kind of get to it, and it's. I mean, just. I mean, I can't. We can't reduce it to something, but it's. You know, part of it is like, so. For example, if I'm friends with Chris
Yeah.
Um,
I'm friends with Chris.
we're all friends with Chris Rufo.
Yeah.
Chris calls himself a conservative.
Yeah.
You know, I would use that term for myself only in the context of also explaining how I'm liberal and libertarian.
Right.
Chris, you know, whatever. He's endorsed DeSantis. I have not endorsed. I don't think I will actually. Who cares? Like, or whatever. Like, there might be.
Precisely.
You kind of go, because I think there's some weird idea of association. I think with weak characters go.
Yeah.
I'm not going to use an example now, but like a weak character goes, "You said that."
Yeah.
And because people know that we're friends.
Yeah.
It hurts me with my friends.
That's a
Anybody
toxic.
that has
That's a
that,
friendship toxin.
That's like, first of all, I mean, it's bizarre.
Yeah.
You know, like if you have friends that judge you on the basis of your friends, then you're 15 years old and you're in middle school. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
You're like, well,
totally
you're
know what you mean.
that person's whatever. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. Did we go back to middle school suddenly? It's
Yeah.
it's immature, and in adults, it's pathological, as opposed to being like, I don't know what I think about that issue, or my friends do all sorts of things. I don't want to prove everything my friends do. We're still friends. There's something, you know. I mean, of course, you could go too far.
Well, I'm literally just gonna say
yeah.
there are lines in the sand.
Yeah, yeah.
There are red lines.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Maybe
Bret,
that's what it is. In other words,
Yeah.
you know, if one of us was like, you know, murdered somebody, you know, and was in prison. I mean, it's an interesting thing because you could even see a thing where you're like, they murdered somebody. It wasn't great. You know, I'm sorry they did it. It was a psychotic episode or whatever the consequences of it were.
Yeah.
You might still go visit them in prison and be friends with a murderer. It's
Yeah,
not
for
even
sure.
inconceivable. Or somebody might do something that's not illegal. That might be enough. I mean, I'm not saying
Yeah.
there's nothing that you will do
Yeah.
that would mean that we will never be friends
Yeah,
again.
and you know-
but it's definitely not going to be your views on trans issues.
Right,
Or
right.
climate change.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, and I think that there's something else about, somebody said something, you have to denounce this person. Like,
Right.
I've had people privately, so I want you to know, like, if you said something I thought was like way off the rails, I would totally tell you.
Oh yeah, same.
And I would tell you, I would just pick up the phone and
Yeah.
I would tell you. But I
do it the
wouldn't
right
s-
way.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go public with it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could imagine lines. You know what I mean? You could imagine.
But the first thing is, I would want to say, did I understand this correctly? Okay, why
Yeah.
did you do this?
Yeah,
What is
yeah.
your thinking in this?
Yeah.
And I suppose if it's absolutely essential to repudiate someone's beliefs, it's, you know, hey, Michael believes this, I happen to disagree with him, and you're like,
Right.
okay, but so what?
Yeah.
Again, so what? You know, and the other thing that I think is important,
I mean, if I got up and gave a speech and I was like, we should all go and murder this whole class of people. I mean, you could, in other words, like, I think we could find cases where we would end our friendship with each other.
Yeah, but
the funny thing is that it just got, the line moved so far, right?
true, but even that I might think is a modest proposal. You know, a Swiftian kind of joke or something. Like,
Yeah.
even then, I would...
You would still want to pick up the phone and be like, you didn't really...
Yeah, like,
Right.
were you trying to get at something else?
Right.
Because that's not the person I know.
Because the joke did not land.
Right. The joke did not land. Maybe you need to clarify that
Yeah.
that's you're doing something.
Yeah. But I think the point is more like, it's more like a dial than a switch in some senses than that. Like, it's that actually people were asking, we got to a point where it's like, people were like, you have to denounce that person because they didn't put a black square on their Instagram page.
Crazy.
You know, as opposed to, so I mean, the lines that we're talking about are pretty intense.
Yeah.
Whereas the lines just got more and more petty over the last decade of social media, right?
Yeah.
One of the pleasures of this Brendan O'Neill book is
Can't
that
wait to read that.
Yeah, I won't totally. I mean, there's a lot I could spoil, but he makes this case. He's just like, speech is dangerous. He sort of goes, stop. He said, we as advocates of free speech, we should not suggest that speech isn't dangerous.
Yeah.
It is dangerous, and that's why we need it to be free.
Yeah.
And he's right about that. And I think we've all experienced the consequences of engaging in free and dangerous speech, and then we end up finding friends that can handle it, you know. And that's why I think those extreme cases where it's like, sure, you could imagine some case of us losing our friendships, but it's almost inconceivable because we know where we stand in our core values. We're not going to stand up there and say something like X group, whatever, should be punished. Like, it's quite the opposite. We're trying to we're gonna have if we're gonna have disagreements and we're gonna talk about faith. I think that all people, including atheists, need to have a spiritual life, for example. And if they don't have it, they're in trouble.
So I was even thinking the trans thing, like, if I told you I think kids under 18 should be allowed to transition, I can't. Again, it gets back to what the deal breaker in the friendship is.
Yeah, like the UFO thing. Just to come back to it, I did take some. We lost some subscribers. I got some nasty emails. I'm not going to do a UFO story, every week. Trans is close by. We will do trans stories, but I can do a censorship story, every day and not be worried about it because you're on such strong ground. But the more risky ones, I just take care. Like trans, one of the things that you and I found, and this will come out when we finally publish, was that we were like, there's climate change, racism, and trans. If you take kind of the big three woke pillars, trans is the craziest.
Yeah,
like
for
it's
sure,
just like
100%.
Because
we had to keep cutting those categories because they just kept proliferating.
Like climate change is real, and I want to do something about it. Racism is real, and there's, like trans. Like when you start getting into like, can you change sex? That you start to get into some really crazier territory. So I find myself on trans and UFOs being more careful, but still it's not the same as that walking on eggshells. I'm dealing with a bunch of kind of people who could explode at any moment, or I could lose all my money.
For me at least, it's a different kind of anxiety.
Yeah.
My son said something to me interesting last night. We went out to dinner, and I said, "Can you hand me with Reid was there? Can you hand me that?" And I extension. I just pointed, and he handed me the wrong thing, and then he said, "Oh no." I said, "No, it's that." And he said, "Oh, sorry." And he said, in Chinese, my son speaks fluent Mandarin. He said in Chinese, there's a word for I'm sorry, like. The word "I'm sorry" is just like a blanket word. Like, I'm sorry if it's not your fault. I'm sorry it's not my fault. But there's was no harm, no foul.
Right.
And I know nothing about Chinese. I can say like 5 words in Chinese, and 4 of those are vulgarities. So don't ask me any questions. But I think it's kind of the same principle operative here. Like, it's a different kind of anxiety, but we just use the linguistic tag anxiety. But to me, I do think when I was in my friend Rodrigo said something to me when I was in MCC in Hungary. He said, you have PTSD. First time I went to Hungary from after your experience, and I'm like, shit, I do have PTSD. Yeah. Like I have a kind of, it's not exactly, but I do find this kind of low grade anxiety, but it used to be an anxiety that I would say the wrong thing or I'd have the wrong position. It's the worst anxiety ever if you teach ethics, right? Because you always have to, you're always thinking, because you want to provide a good experience for the students that's honest, which we've stopped providing. So we're basically giving degrees to people that are total nonsense for the most part.
Right.
Yeah, but anyway, I just want to throw that out. Okay, so.
And you're perpetuating a culture of fear.
Yeah, and I think we haven't talked about it all, but I've been on for years about the legitimacy crisis. There's a crisis of confidence in our institution. We have, that's the woke thing with Vivek and Bret again. We have people, the mission statements of the organization, like the ACLU, are the same, and I made the SPLC as in a couple of honorable mentions. But the people discharging those mission statements, they have different values, so they have different interpretations. Like now the ACLU would never let the American Nazi Party march in Skokie or what have you. Right. All right, so check this video out.
All right.
This is with a guy.
Oh, sure. Billboard Chris.
You know Billboard Chris.
Of course.
Yes.
So,
to tell you what it means.
Transition is something you do, it's not something you are. Well, no, you have the opportunity here to educate a couple 100,000 people online about what it means to be trans.
Educate people online.
Educate people online about what?
Well,
why are you blocking
trans.
this? Why are you blocking it? Why are you here? What message do you want to give people?
Okay, here's the message.
We're listening.
Y'all are a bunch of fascists using transgender medicine as a spearhead for your fascist take over the country because you're patriarchal white supremacists, and this is just what it is, and y'all know what it is.
Why are we're white supremacists? What is your evidence for even saying that, besides just being a jerk to us?
White, right?
You're white.
And like white supremacy,
Are you a white
the
supremacist?
tip of the spear of white supremacy is anti-transgender
Oh.
discourse, right?
So it's I don't know if he's an adjunct or he or she or whatever. I don't know. Professor at Portland State University when we went there. That was a zoo. That was a zoo. People blowing horns.
This is your
former university.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's exactly what one would expect. They're blowing horns,
Yeah.
they're carrying signs,
Yeah.
they're putting music
They're
in
protesting
their
you,
ears.
by the way. They're protesting you specifically?
Well, no, myself and Billboard Chris and James, so this was a fascinating thing. This is a fascinating thing. So Billboard Chris is with this billboard says,
Yeah.
children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And when people ask me, I was going to ask you, what's the one thing you're most confident about in this whole culture war, beside the free speech thing? That would be very high on my list. And so he can't change the claim. It's,
Right.
And instead of addressing the claim, or instead of saying, okay, this is why that's wrong, we see a few things. The attempt to disrupt, they have different rules of engagement. Instead of addressing that, they're talking about, trans people or people. Nobody's saying that. Like literally nobody's saying
Right.
that. It's a very specific claim about people under 18 getting Lupron and other invasive surgical procedures that are, as Abigail Schreier, as irreversible damage. Deborah So's talking about this. Helen Joyce talked about this. So I found that interesting. The other thing I found interesting about that was there was a necessary trajectory, because we repeated that at the University of Oregon in Eugene. It was the University of Oregon, right, Reid? Yeah. And here it was. Someone comes up, blah, 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 this is not happening. Provide overwhelming evidence. It's a good thing it's happening.
Right.
It was just, and the other people are incapable of addressing it's right on the billboard. It's like literally right there. And they're utterly incapable of using the tools of reason and logic. And that person was a professor in the video.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, what do you think of that? I mean, is that...
I think this is why we were saying this trans is the most crazy of these issues.
Uber crazy.
Yeah. My dad was a psychologist, and he had a term that he would apply to situations like that, and he would call it crazy making. And I think there's I haven't read the research on it, but there's something, when you say this is not happening, and then 30 seconds later say it's good that it's happening, that's classic crazy making. Taibbi made the point when we were on stage in London, he made the point that George Orwell talked about in 1984, the importance of erasing the past, and that memory becomes the enemy. So if they say, you just take a famous historical example, if they say, Stalin says the Nazis are the good guys, and then he says the Nazis were always the bad guys, without, it's fine to maybe change sides, but you would then kind of go, well, we thought they were the good guys and we were wrong. It turns out they're the bad guys. But instead, it's like, no, they were always the bad guys. But we were in alliance with them. So how are you? No, shut up, fascist.
Right.
Whatever.
Fascist is another one.
Yeah. So the name calling is a way. So it's all about not having the conversation. It's all about censorship. It's all about shutting down speech.
Yeah.
It's about power. It's about gaining control. It's about intimidation. It's about bullying. It's about getting you to shut up. And so it's not, I think it's interesting because I don't think what Chris, Billboard person, what's his last name?
I don't know. I
don't want to dehumanize him.
Eggleston.
Billboard Chris.
Billboard Chris.
I don't think Billboard Chris, I think there are people that he's having a conversation with, but I don't think that what he's doing either is exactly about having a conversation. He's actually putting a billboard on, and he's having.
No, his shtick is not to have.
performance.
Right, his shtick is not to have.
He's showing other people's intolerance.
Right, he's not doing street epistemology.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing is, if you look at What is a Woman, there is what's brilliant about What is a Woman and what Matt Walsh does, and he doesn't always do it, but he does it in the movies. He does sit down with people and tries to have a conversation, and he shows how it's impossible to have it because they're not going to answer what a woman is in any way that's not circular and therefore
Chris
nonsensical.
Elston. Yeah. And there is a kind of, when your enemy's committing a mistake, don't interrupt him.
Right. I mean, the stochastic terrorism is another interesting one.
Yeah.
So there's something, so the accusation is that Chris is guilty of it, Billboard Chris. But of course, when you go, when you punch somebody in the face and you go, I'm not punching you in the face, that's stochastic. There's a kind of, it's also cults do it. You know, cults engage in behaviors that are, there's a lot, they're trying to maintain a sense of disorientation. You know, there's a like that. One of the classic cult experiences is for you to always be off guard because then you're incapable of defending yourself, and therefore you can then degrade somebody and strip down who they are. So there is something quite violent about those tactics.
Yeah. Michael, I love your work. I'm so grateful that you're in my life as a friend.
Same here, man.
And I appreciate that. And I'm super excited, like genuinely happy that you're now affiliated and associated with UATX. I think this is I genuinely believe this is the perfect place for you. Like
so happy to be here.
I could not have picked a better place. Where can people find you online?
Twitter is still the go-to, so at Shellenberger, and then I'm also on Substack. Our Substack publication is called Public.
Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate the conversation.